Hey traders, this is Christian Farmer. It's Tribeca Trade Group, and this is your recap for Wednesday, October 3rd. Pretty interesting. A nice deal was announced here after the close today. Hortonworks, HDP, and Cloudera. And it looks like, just by the reaction, it's an all-stock deal, but both of these names going pretty nice. So it looks like the market likes these two, and we really haven't had. Yeah, I mean, I guess there has been a number of deals that have been announced, but I think a lot of them, I don't know, maybe it's just names that I just really haven't been participating in too much, but a lot of private, deals that are names that are private. I don't see that. I just haven't seen that many public names that have been big M&A this year, unless I'm missing something off the top of my head. But I think this is interesting that both of these are going up because this group, and I've got my own index that basically looks at this group. But in case you don't have access to that index on Bloomberg, you could look at the basically the tech and software group, which really hasn't pulled back too much the last couple days. It's just a little bit off the highs. I've been actually, secretly, and I'm long this in cash. But I've been secretly hoping that this kind of comes in a little bit more because it really gets the buyers going. And we've seen this now a couple times. But, I was kind of anticipating that this could go down a little bit more, but maybe that's all we get. This group could be could move pretty decently. I've been in Splunk, which has not worked out well. It's hanging on by a thread here to the earnings gap. But this, we saw some, which it's doing okay. It's just my entry point, and we've seen a lot of short-term calls that have gone up in Splunk. For now, I'm still in it. Vive had a nice hammer today. I actually saw a big block of puts that went up yesterday, but maybe that was a little bit of protection, and this had a nice hammer bar today. So if you go through some of these names, which I like to do at least once a week, kind of go through where there's been some really good strength. I think NTNX, which is a name that's been beaten up. This was up 3.4% today. So if you kind of go on and go through this group, you'll find that this group kind of comes back pretty decently. And if we look today, it just hasn't really been in focus the last week too. But names like Hubs and Splunk was up there in terms of today's performers. Workday's another one that we could just look at the chart very briefly. And I actually just shot a Real Vision video on this group yesterday. So if you're a subscriber to that, you could see my whole video there. But Hubs actually had a nice bullish engulfing candle as well. What was the other one I was going to look at? Workday. Yeah, I mean they're just kind of been resting a little bit. And the another one that I like to look at is Now in Shop. Yeah, this group doesn't look bad. Just kind of going through these on the fly. But anyway, that was the deal that was announced. So I think that's definitely intriguing after hours, and maybe that gives some of this group a lift a little bit tomorrow. So that's what I would keep an eye on. The big story today was rates. What happened today in the long end of the curve. This was a so I'm going to talk a little bit about these version point of controls for a minute. This is something that I talk about in every video, but sometimes I don't give really a great explanation to it. But they act so damn good in terms of taking targets on things and and really kind of to watch out where there could be a place where something pauses. But I said this in the morning, once we broke this support, we really picked up some momentum to the downside, which is typically what happens. Either when you're moving up or moving down and you break either support or resistance, you could really start to get going in one direction. But notice where we got to, and I was surprised that we got to it today because the chart that I sent out earlier was only when we were about here. But we took this out today, and there is another one behind here if you go to a weekly bar. So we might see a little bit of a move back after this. We'll see. And I think I said yesterday that TLT was a must watch because it affects so many things, right? It doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? When rates do this, it affects so many things. It affects banks, especially regional banks. It affects utilities, consumer staples, REITs, anything that gets that's a high dividend yield in equities will really get affected, or things that do well when rates go higher, which are typically the banks, right? So if you look at the weekly chart, we do have another VPOC down here at 113, which again is not that far. I mean, we went down what, $2 today in this. There was a little bit, there was some decent positioning that we saw in TLT today. If you take a look at what we saw, there was a little bit of some spreads that went up today. So let me just take this off of sweeps, and I want all. But it looks like this has happened a couple times where somebody comes right in and buys calls. And we could see how this looks in terms of the positioning, but you could see the big block of calls that went up, and you could see calls out in December. So somebody thinking that this was maybe too much of a knee-jerk reaction, and positioned actually to go long bonds. Keep in mind, one of the articles that's been floating around, and I'm not sure if I talked about this in yesterday's video, is that the 10-year note has the biggest short position on record by hedge funds. So maybe that is why that somebody is thinking that they are way too far or leaning on one side of the boat, right? And sometimes that could kind of cause the boat to tip over when everybody has the same exact trade on, especially the hedge funds, which I know some people call smart money. I wouldn't use that term with hedge funds. Sorry, but they are leaning all on the same side of being short treasuries. So we'll see how that plays itself out. But you could see a lot of December and a lot of January calls in TLT. I also saw a spread that went up earlier. Let's see if I can just find it on my other screen. Yeah, a lot of January, December. Some of them went up late. There was also some puts that looked like they were sold as well, and that happened in the morning. That happened before the big move down. So if that's what they did, that probably hurt a little bit. But what else do we see? Kind of as I mentioned, there's a lot of related things going on here. There was also a lot of KRE. Looks like they were selling puts. This is after a big move in the regional banks. So this kind of makes sense to me, right? If somebody is thinking that I'm on let me get off the weekly chart, which I do think is interesting here, but usually people come in and sell puts after a big move down, right? And they think that move has been realized. But this came back with a vengeance today, so there is some support here. So let's see if that holds. And like I said, there was some action here. There was some put selling. There was also, I thought, some call buying here in the 62. So if you go for a little bit further out, you could see the December 22s. So again, a lot. These are sizable orders. This was a 5.3 million order. This was a 2.6 million dollar order. This was another 2.6 million dollar order. So these are in the frame of ginormous, right? I know a lot of times people will talk about and they'll tweet about like orders and in single names that are like $25,000 in premium, and I don't think that sometimes puts things in perspective, the difference in the size sometimes versus sometimes just repeat call activity is like 20,000 premium at a clip, which can get momentum going, and sometimes they're chasing momentum, but these are really large orders. Then if you turn over to XLU, which is the utility ETF, remember utilities tend to go the other way when a big move, and you could see puts. They traded over 40,000 of these, and they went out to January too. So these are not small trades. Look at the premium over here. So this added up to $3 million in premium that someone is using the XLU ETF to kind of position for. So it sounds like there's different point of views here. Somebody's going to be right. Somebody's going to be wrong. They're buying TLT calls, and when that happens, usually utilities go up. Because of yields, with the whole yield relationship. This looks like somebody's positioning out in January for utilities to go down. So you got two different positioning. It really depends on what your views are. And just when just to kind of nail that that point home, it really depends on how you use option activity for. I do not follow option activity. That's the last thing in the world I would do. What I use it is just kind of gauge of sentiment, and I really kind of use it for trade ideas. So you could see XLU had a real nice rally, but into resistance, which is the 50-day moving average. So we'll see. We'll see who wins this battle with somebody going long KRE, somebody going short XLU, and somebody going long TLT. So you can kind of put these into your own filter and figure out if any of these line up for you. But clearly there was a lot of positioning going on, and I think that was one of the most interesting things today. Besides that, for the overall market, which I didn't even get a chance to really touch upon, kind of more of what we've been seeing. And if you're a really fast trader, or if you're positioning at the end of the day so that you could take these trades off in the beginning of the day, that's probably what has been working best right now, because everything gets faded, and that's basically not everything. Some names I shouldn't categorize like that, because we were watching today in the trading room when the VIX was really starting to heat up a little bit. Some names were unaffected. Meanwhile, some names were really getting hit pretty hard. So, down 7 basis points for the day using S&P futures. We're not losing any of the short-term moving averages, but it looks like this market is tired to me. And I talked about that. I added a few puts yesterday, and if the worst thing happens is we just kind of churn a little bit, that's not really a bad outcome. And my puts will probably not work in that situation, but at least I have a little bit of insurance. The big thing, of course, yesterday was, and I think at that point, everybody talking about small caps, they came back nicely. And if you look to see, now normally like the naked eye, I do try to find some reasoning for this. Like, how did these small caps come back? Well, first of all, it's just an inside day. So let's not, I see a lot of high fives on Twitter today. I don't really see a lot changing from yesterday, so I don't really get why people are giving each other high fives about an inside day. I don't know, because this is tucked still underneath the short-term moving averages. So I'm not necessarily sure this is over with. I should say that correctly. So and same thing for. I went short FDN yesterday, and I talked about that in the video. And, it started to get a little bit of a bounce. It did rise 60 basis points, but it's just an inside day. So I will gladly take those puts off if we get back into this. But, I want to err on the conservative side when I start to see things break down, right? We saw that in IWM clearly. Up here is where we started to break down, and there was some momentum to the downside. So, I was looking at Amazon today, and we talked about this in the trading room today. I almost took a stab at it today. I said, let me just wait. We've got 3 days in a row of Amazon weakness. If we get one more day, and if we get down to the 50-day moving average, that's really where I would be a buyer. But I just don't. I just don't know. Amazon, we don't get that many down days. But I'm staying vigilant and patient, and it did close on the lows today. So maybe tomorrow is my day to give to maybe put some. What I've been doing, and I'll share a little bit of my strategy. I don't mind. Is to basically sell put spreads, right? I do that when after a decent move. I had a whopper of a trade. And I just don't talk about some of these winners that much, because I just move on to the next trade, and I see just I like every once in a while to do a quick high five. That's cool, but I see a couple other people today just retweeting and retweeting and retweeting themselves with profits. Okay, just act like you've been there before. Put your big boy pants on. Sorry. But anyway, so that what I like to do, and where I did this last time was in here when we hit the 50-day moving average. I think it got a little bit dicey for me here on this day, but I was able to cover that trade pretty nicely. Sorry. So that's Amazon. So I think just giving this a little bit more time, and if they happen to go down a little bit, I've got the insurance on for it now. A couple of trades that I started to work out a little bit today was CSX. I didn't get a chance to talk about oil yet, but oil is continuing to move higher. A little bit suspect because it's a lot on headlines, which sometimes ends up being a one-day event. I think there were some headlines with Iran, and sometimes that comes and goes. So we'll kind of see how that works its way out. There was a big build in oil inventories, but these oil inventory reports seem very difficult um, to figure out. I just basically I look at the numbers every week, and I make no judgment on them because it just doesn't seem to be going logically, right? It used to be a couple years ago when you would see a big build in oil inventories, oil would go down immediately. Now oil does a whipsaw move and then it goes the opposite direction that I think. So I tend to just if it doesn't make sense anymore, I tend to pay less and less attention to it. So CSX had a nice day. I was able to take some of this, and again, going back to like those putting those trades on either at the end of the day or adding to some of your trades at the end of the day, and then making sure that you take targets. I took a target in CSX. Would I like to see this go higher and out further out of this coil? Absolutely. But I've gotten caught in trades. I got caught in a trade today in Procter and Gamble. So I'm happy to talk about the losers. And this, when you see this not happening the way that you want, right? We started the day higher, and look at this smoke show happening in Procter and Gamble, because I have been playing a little bit more value names the last couple days. But I got out of this. I put on calls, I think for what, $1.30, and I ended up getting out of them at around $1.10. So that's what happens when you're playing with options. You have to be pretty quick. But I think I missed the majority of the damage by doing that. But this looked pretty good in terms of a long swing. But the move in rates hurt the consumer staples as well. XLP got hit pretty hard today. All right, and then just a couple other charts. What's been working, that have been pretty isolated from what I looked at with some of the major indices. Apple continues to look lovely. I mentioned it was just the first bar yesterday of an MACD crossover, so it had more to go, which often is the case when a new MACD crossover happens. Boeing, beautiful breakout. Been talking about that one for the last couple of days. Caterpillar got going, after a nice hammer bar. We talked about this one earlier in the room today. Kind of a little bit of a move down on Monday, but not too much damage, low volume. Yesterday got going, and then you got a gap up and up 2.2% in a day to take some profits if you were in that trade. Today's option activity. So those are a couple charts. I could go on, probably for another 15 minutes about charts, but there was some interesting option activity right in the beginning of the day. We saw a lot of win and so casino names. Now, granted, we've been seeing a lot of win calls, and they really haven't worked. So I didn't chase this particular order today. Las Vegas Sands also saw some positioning. I think Las Vegas Sands actually looks a little bit more constructive, trying to get over the 20-day moving average. One name that we've been seeing some option activity in is IQ. I've been watching it, no position yet, just kind of being mindful of this one. A few other names that we saw calls in. Xilinx has been a repeat call buyer. This did break out, although it looks like a little bit of a toppy candle. But we saw more calls again today, and it did launch higher after those calls. MRVL has been seeing some call activity as well. This name has been stuck underneath the 200. But they look like they're positioning for a rebound in MRVL. I thought that was an interesting trade here going out into November. Also, a little bit NVIDIA calls today. I mentioned Caterpillar as well. Also, some AMD. Some AMD. It seems like Intel and AMD seem to be a zero-sum game. So we did have a hammer bar. That'll be an interesting name to watch. And Intel had the opposite bar, right? So it looks like a toppy candle at the 200-day moving average. So maybe that outperformance Intel over AMD. I don't know. Maybe it's the last day of that. I don't have a position in either one, but it's been kind of fun to watch since this interim CEO made those comments last week about capital spending picking up over there. PAGS, which I'm still long this name. I think this thing looks fine. I'm long stock, so I've been able to kind of give it some time here, and I'm targeting this 3150 VPOC on the long side. So I've been sitting in this name since it broke this downtrend line, a little bit of a counter trend trade. The other name that started to perk up a little bit was Mallinckrodt. If you remember, I shot a video on this about, I think it was last week ago, and I gave a whole example about whether there was October calls that went up, and I made a whole case calls, short-term calls versus going long stock. I've been sitting long stock this one, so now I am much over my purchase price of basically $30. So I'm up a buck in this, and you got some things going on. We're above the 50-day moving average, and we're just out of this. I came very close to being stopped out on this the one day, and I said, hey, let's give it one more day. It still has this support, and the thing turned around. So hopefully we get an MACD crossover as well coming in this one. What else? A little bit of Texas Instruments calls, WGO, call spread. Like I said, I could go on and on, but it's been 20 minutes, so I'll end the video here. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.